I was delighted to have this invitation. Thank you so much for inviting me here. I'll start off with a bit of a short talk, and then hopefully for the second half of the hour, we can have some joint discussion amongst everybody in the room. As Helen so kindly introduced me, my name is Cassie, and I'm a PPI liaison officer. My role is co-hosted between both the Rare Disease Clinical Trial Network and Health Research Charities Ireland, and that's been a really, really powerful partnership. It allows us to leverage the best of both the clinical and charity research sectors, and we learn across those sectors all the time. So I kind of think of myself as a bit bilingual because I'm learning and communicating across both those sectors. So the work that I'll talk about today is a direct result of our partnership. We applied for funding together, we identified the need for this piece of work together, and we drove that initiative together as well. So if you're here, you're probably already aware of what EDI is, but I think I'll just give a brief explanation in case we're using terms differently. So EDI refers to equality or equity, meaning giving everyone the same resources and opportunities to contribute, whereas equity is providing specific supports rather than a one-size-fits-all approach. The D in EDI refers to diversity. And right now you might be thinking they have a white woman talking about EDI, and you're absolutely right to be thinking about ethnicity. It's a really important aspect of diversity, alongside some of the examples we have here on this wheel. So things like education, neurodiversity, disability or ability, languages, and so on. And all of these ways of being, if you will, they shape with how we interact with systems and groups. And then, of course, how something like the system interacts with us. So in our example here of health research, we're thinking about the healthcare system. So being a documented person, I'm American myself, living in Ireland. And being a documented person means I have a different experience with things like healthcare access. And you wouldn't believe, I've been here 4 years, the number of questions I still ask trying to understand how the healthcare system here works. So I have a different experience than someone who's a citizen might, and that again is different from someone who's undocumented. So that knowledge that we bring is really valuable when we're thinking about designing systems and research that works for everybody. And we really find that having more perspectives in the room creates a more holistic approach. So one of the ways that I think about this is if you're peeking inside of a room and you're only looking in from one window, you can see bits of the room. But the more windows you look in, the better you can see what's inside that room. And that's really why diversity is so critical when it comes to research and design. And the guide that we'll be talking about today mostly focuses on this I of EDI, which is around inclusion. And so this is ensuring that people feel welcome and able to contribute, especially in a setting like public and patient involvement. So there's massive appetite for EDI. Like yourselves, if you're here, you're probably aware, it is important and it improves research. And we heard this coming from both the PPI panel at the Rare Disease Clinical Trial Network. That is a panel that I help support of 30 people living with various experiences of rare disease. And that group is largely, they largely identify as women, and they are largely white. And so they've come forward and said, EDI is really important. We need to think about diversity. We need to make sure that people feel included. We also hear this quite often from the member charities of HRCI. So Health Research Charities Ireland is an umbrella organization. We have over 45 charities who are members conducting their own research and funding their own research. And they're coming forward also saying that EDI is really important. Oops, sorry about that. So we know that people want to do it right. We're just not always sure how. So this was really inspired by the rare disease community. And the rare disease community itself is incredibly diverse because it's at the intersection of things like age and disability and ethnicity and sexuality, social class, even severity of disease. So there's many types of diversity within rare disease. So it's a great place to learn from. And we really believe that if you can get it right for rare, it's right for everywhere. So the things we'll talk about today and the practical guidance that came out of the workshops, these apply across all areas of research. They were inspired by the rare disease community, but because that community is so diverse and it intersects with so many different things, we really think these are powerful tools in any area of research. So after identifying this as something that would be of interest and of value to the research community, we decided to learn from the wisdom of the crowd. And we held 2 workshops, which allowed us to learn from the community themselves. So this brought together many different stakeholders, if you will. So people living with rare disease carers, charities, and people who have research background, experience working with diverse communities themselves. And these were supported by seed funding that we received from PPI Ignite at University College Dublin. So we're very grateful for that funding. It allowed us to hold the workshops, and I'll talk a little bit about what those workshops included. One aspect that was really important to us is that there was fair compensation for people's time and knowledge, and that was something the seed funding provided us. So coming into the project, we wanted to explore barriers and enablers to inclusive PPI. And what better place than to talk about people who are involved in PPI on a regular basis as researchers, charity members, and people with lived experience. And the goal was to identify practical strategies for improving inclusion. Instead of just having frameworks and theories, which are incredibly valuable, but sometimes you can walk away from that saying, okay, I know what is important, but I don't know exactly what I should do. And we said we really want to identify practical strategies. That was really important. So that was one of the goals. And then thirdly, to share that guidance and to be able to then promote these ideas and share how you might be able to strengthen EDI within PPI, which resulted in the guide that I'll share with you towards the end of the talk. So we got together with folks to learn from them around what practical things work, and then to be able to tell others about those practical ideas. That was the goal. And I hope that we have achieved that. So what did a workshop look like? Well, I will tell you the good, bad, and ugly because transparency is part of our ethos. I think that's really important. So there were 2 workshops held. And this is the demographic information for the first workshop. A lot of thought and time went into the venue. Accessibility was really important. We knew we'd be bringing together people from many different backgrounds. So we spent a lot of time looking at different venues, and I'll say we did well, but we didn't get it right. We're never getting everything perfect. And I'll share what some of the feedback said there. We knew it was really important to provide payment for the people who attended and to cover their travel and accommodation costs. That's a huge way of supporting diversity and increasing inclusion. And so we knew that was important, and we were able to do that again. Thank you so much for that seed funding. And then we offered a comfort break as well as a full lunch. And our hope there was to provide opportunities for really informal networking. We're bringing together a group of people who might have completely different interests and backgrounds and experiences. So we wanted that time for people to feel comfortable in sharing openly their experiences and their thoughts. So we had room for 30. And when we picked out the venue, we said, look, if it's a workshop, you probably don't want more than that many in the room. We'd be really lucky if we hit that number. And we ended up with 32 people coming forward. I think we probably could have had more, but we eventually had to say, look, we're really at a cap. And I'm really impressed to say we had full retention. So all 32 people who signed up came along, and the feedback was overall pretty positive, which again, I'll share with you. So we opened up first with a panel discussion, and that's what you see I always hate looking at pictures of myself. You can see me there. And there was a panel discussion to start. That was just to share language and stories of what inclusion can look like. And people at the workshop, the feedback was very positive. They said it was important to be able to hear different examples of diversity. And then after that, we broke into table discussions, and that's what you see at the bottom here. And everybody there was completely open, so we had folks at the table from age 17 to I think 73, many different backgrounds, disabilities, different ethnicities, religious backgrounds, everything. And overall, the feedback that came in, people were really thrilled to be able to chat with people who had such differences from them. We as organizers thought, oh, are we gonna create a little bit of maybe anxiety, or maybe people will feel unsure about how to have these conversations? But our feedback was actually that people really enjoyed that opportunity. So the table discussions had four main topics, and I thought I'd bring those along just so you can kind of see how this was structured. I won't go deep into this, but I did want to share there were four main discussion topics that came forward. And we used what was called a modified World Cafe approach. So in a World Cafe, typically you sit at a table, you'll have a discussion, and then everybody rotates. So you have a real breadth of conversation because you're meeting with new people. And the feedback from working with our PPI partners was that many of them had vision loss, or used mobility aids, or they were just not as comfortable moving about the room. And so they said, I'm going to sit here with my tea, and then I'm going to have to use my mobility aids and somehow carry that tea over to another table. And it's actually quite burdensome for me to do that. So do you think instead you could have the person who's facilitating at the table, could they rotate? And so we use that modified approach instead. And the feedback there again was that people enjoyed having the chance to talk to the same people at the table and be able to develop those relationships a bit further. So the table facilitators would have one of these topics that they were responsible for leading a conversation on, and they captured discussion notes on each of those principles. So the four principles here, I've got each of the tables in bold. We had ensuring people are able to contribute, building a sense of belonging, making sure people feel heard and valued, and expanding involvement in PPI. So those were our four principles, and each of those principles had a guiding question. So for example, when you're thinking about ensuring people are able to contribute in PPI, the question is, what are ways to increase accessibility so no one feels excluded? And then for each of these, I didn't share all of the individual questions just because it's way too many words on a slide, but I thought I'd bring some so you can sort of see what this looks like. We tried to think of specific ways to keep the conversation around practical ideas. So here, for this table, people were having the discussion around, can you think of a time when someone adapted a meeting, event, or activity that made it more accessible, and why? What worked? Or what are practical ways that researchers can make PPI involvement more flexible? So these type of questions elicited a conversation that had really real world ideas that people had seen in action and were able to talk about. So these notes were then captured by each of the table facilitators. And I want to note here, while you're looking at the different topics, that absolutely we're learning from a diverse group of people with experience of rare disease. But if you'll look, the questions and the discussions weren't rare disease specific. Because again, if it's right for rare, it's right for everywhere, is what we like to say. So these people are bringing in lived experience of disability, they're bringing in lived experience of caring, and they're talking about that experience. And while that is in the context of rare disease, these are principles that can help all of us. So overall, the feedback, people found it very good or excellent, and 80% felt a lot more knowledgeable about EDI after the workshops. So we were really heartened to see that feedback. But I promised you I would tell you the good, bad, and ugly. So we didn't get it all right. We did have a little bit of trouble around dietary accommodations. So we had some folks who needed gluten-free food, and that ended up showing up late, and it required a little bit of extra back and forth with the venue staff. One of our attendees had trimmers and needed a straw to be able to drink out of the cup comfortably. That was actually quite hard to source, so we had to send somebody to be able to find that within the venue. The room could be quite echoey at times, and so especially people who had some hearing loss were a bit troubled by that, being able to hear what was happening at their own table compared to the tables next to them. And also we had feedback that people actually wanted longer sessions to discuss. Especially with us doing this for the first time, we said, let's try to keep it to about 3 hours. And people walked away saying, I could have done with longer. And also I wanted to share that while I said dining was a little bit maybe chaotic, people had to register what they would have at lunch during when they checked in. And some people needed halal options and vegan options. So my main takeaway that I would share if you're looking to replicate some of this or run workshops of your own, you can never have enough support and you can never have enough extra hands, extra people on hand. It's very, very useful. So out of these conversations, we had pages of notes, loads of ideas. And like I said, we really wanted to turn them into something practical. So what can we walk away with and what can we do today? That was really at the heart of what we were putting together. And it was really helpful that the discussions were aimed at this because then we were able to have those conversations in a really practical way. So our next piece of work was to take all of these lovely discussions and the notes that we had and then turn that into some guidance that we could share. And we co-created this as well with PPI partners. And we hope that the tone is friendly. We even put friendly in the title. That's really our goal. It's publicly available on our website. And we're really thrilled with the design. I think it's a very nice looking document as well. I think it's quite approachable. I hope you find it the same. The design team at Catalyst really wowed us with that. And again, we were able to use our seed funding to make it graphically designed and a little bit more interesting. So I say that really quickly as a side note. It's designed for people who might not have time to read long, dense academic documents. But if you do like to read long and dense academic documents, we're submitting a manuscript soon. So stay tuned if you would like to read that. It's got full details of the method, the results, and the analysis. And we're going to try to get that into a journal. So that will be forthcoming if you're interested in more details. But the version that's available right now, we want it to be friendly and approachable and easy to dive in. So the focus here is on inclusion. How can we make sure that people are feeling welcomed and valued and included? Our goal was really for somebody to read it or flip through it and feel like, okay, now give one of these ideas a try. Just give it a go. That was our hope of the tone. So I'll give you a sneak preview of some of the practical ideas and maybe that can lead us into some discussion in the latter half of this webinar here. So in the guide, there's more than 25 actionable ideas, and we included a quick reference guide. It's 2 pages to keep handy just for ideas on what you might be able to do today to be more inclusive. One of the big pieces of work we ran into is how do we organize this? And we went back and forth between charity partners and clinical partners and PPI partners saying, what order do we put these things in? How do we lump them together? And that really was a big piece of work. Ultimately, there was discussion about putting it in the form of roughly of the research process. But we felt maybe that leaned a bit. There were some that wouldn't seat neatly in there because things that are supposed to be happening maybe when you're collecting results also can be happening during when you're doing your lit review. So it wasn't quite as clean as we wanted. And ultimately, the PPI partners came forward and said, what if you organize it into sections based off of building a relationship? Which is similar to the research process, but not exactly the same. Some of it maps on. So it's organized into 4 sections, and those are inviting people into partnership, nurturing partnership, enabling partnership, and honoring partnership. So I'll give an example from each one of those so that maybe you have an idea of what that looks like. And within each of those sections, we have practical ideas. Each idea follows a format. So first there's the topic, which is in bold, and you'll see what that looks like here in a second, with a question to maybe reflect on, and then at least one concrete practical idea that you can implement. So to move through those sections, our first one is inviting people into partnership. And the focus here is how do we reach people that aren't already in the room? We know that's really critical. So when you're first making contact with somebody, or even maybe before you reach out to them, what are steps you can do to be inclusive? And one of the most enthusiastic conversations of the day from the workshop came around symbols of safety. And this is the main idea. The reflective question to think on is how can you demonstrate that you're an ally? And a practical idea would be something like having pronouns in your email signature or displaying pride flags. Those are all very powerful symbols of a safe space. Now, in this section of inviting people into partnership, you'll also see ideas like offering mentorship and recognizing that expertise flows both ways. So different ways that you might be able to signpost to resources by maybe providing a welcome kit when somebody joins the network or when you first initiate conversation. So having a formalized onboarding process can be a really great way of helping people feel invited into that partnership. So once people are involved, then the question is, they've said, okay, I'm interested in being a PPI partner. How do we make them feel safe? How do we make them feel valued? So how do we nurture this relationship? And one of the questions that came up that I thought was really interesting, especially as someone who sits within the charity sector, at least half of my role is within the charity sector. One of the questions that came up is, what message does it send when you can't find yourself in the drop-down menu? And this could be your affiliation. We happen to see this a lot with charity partners. It can feel a little bit alienating if we go to enroll in an event and it says, what is your affiliation or what kind of role do you have? And you click that menu and there's nothing that says charity or community. And so you're kind of feeling like, well, am I in the right place? And am I going to be the only one there? It can feel a bit alienating. And that could be true as well for gender or ethnicity, right? So how we actually frame those questions and who we include is important. If I have to click the other button, that can feel a little bit exclusionary. And so maybe saying self-described would be a good option. And this bit here does refer to a tools and resources section where we signpost some supports on this, and that's within the guide as well. Another area around nurturing partnership, and I'm sure you're all really aware of this as being something that's important, is planning for compensation and recognition of PPI partners. Payment's really important, and so is talking to people about how they want to be acknowledged. So we think of compensation as payment for their time and expertise, and recognition as being something separate to that. So are they named on the transcript or on the manuscript? Do they have an award presented? Are they nominated for an award? Do they prefer to be publicly acknowledged or privately acknowledged? These type of questions. So in addition to compensation, also thinking about recognition. So enabling partnership came up specifically around trying to remove barriers to participation. So these barriers might be logistical, they might be physical. So here, one of the things that people came forward with that was really a strong conversation was about supporting different paces. So if you require a screen reader or an interpreter, or maybe you process information differently. Maybe you have something like dyslexia or an intellectual disability, you might feel left behind. So it's really useful to provide materials in advance for people. That way they can use whatever supports they have to feel really prepared coming into that conversation or meeting. And then we also would encourage leaving the door open for follow-on contact, because that way people can share at their own pace. I'm sure I'm not the only person who has walked away from a conversation and been like, oh, this is a good idea. I should have said that when I was in the meeting. And so many people experience that. So providing a way that people can follow up is a really useful way to help people feel enabled in their partnership. One of the other things around enabling partnership that has come up in my role that I've learned since working with the rare disease community is to be mindful of digital tools. So I was using a poll software called Doodle, which you might be familiar with, when I was trying to schedule events. And it came forward, and somebody was kind enough to tell me that that does not play well with screen readers, or at least the screen reader that some of the people with vision loss in our PPI partner group, the screen reader that they use. And so that led me into a bit of a dive, like, okay, how can I do this better? How can I do this in a way that's convenient for you? And the Google Suite, so there's Google Forms, that's what we use now instead of Doodle. And in general, it seems like, now this is a conversation you want to have each with your own PPI partners, but in my experience with our panel, Google Suite tends to be a bit more friendly for screen readers than a Microsoft Suite does. So we've been using those Google tools. And when you're thinking about diversity of geography, we have PPI partners all over the island, and that means that their internet speeds are also different. And so we try to offer low bandwidth options when possible. But I guess really the takeaway here is to have the conversation and inquire with people what works best. And then our last theme is around honoring partnership. So the focus here is on closing the feedback loop. And really, I guess when you're trying to be inclusive, you can run into issues around representation and what might end up feeling like tokenism. So we really say, make sure to spread the love, bring in a variety of partners, rotate opportunities so that people don't get burned out. They're not feeling like they're always being pulled in to represent the patient community, that you've got enough partners that you can check in with people and sort of say, look, do you still want to be involved? Does this timing work for you? And that's been really important for us coming from rare disease work, because in longer term partnerships, we like to check in because availability might change, willingness to participate, that can change, especially with periods of progression or chronic pain where people might need to step back a little bit. And so by keeping that conversation open, that's really important. We also offer ad hoc opportunities so that people are involved for as long as they like and when it suits them. Sorry, that's my sidekick there. If you can hear nails on the ground, that's my dog. So all of these different actionable ideas and more are available as this standalone file. So this is a handy summary that you can keep on your wall. I have it as my computer background, and it keeps me thinking inclusively. So it's just a quick reference of different ideas. And it's hosted, like I said, on the websites. It's also available as an accessible version in Word. All right, so that's all well and good. I've given you maybe some new ideas. And I would say before we wrap up on the conversation that we really encourage a light touch start. It's easy to get overwhelmed. And so maybe just begin with one change in your next involvement activity. Notice what's working, celebrate those little wins, and really that this is about progress. It's not immediate perfection. Perfection is something we will probably never reach. And you're probably already doing a lot better at this than you realize. So a final practical idea that came up is, if you're not already, try tracking and learning from diversity. So think about who is and isn't represented, and then you can find gaps in inclusion. And I know it can be a little bit scary trying to do something new and you're worried, am I going to get this wrong? Might I offend somebody? I absolutely relate to that. And so I've included some phrases I use when I work with people. Things like, what would make your involvement easier or more comfortable? And also recognizing that resources can be a limitation. And so people might have ideas that they're just not feasible based off of the funds we have or the time we have. So being able to say, based on what we have to work with, being upfront with that and sharing, this is the limitation that we might have around that. So based off of that, what are your ideas or suggestions? And I think there's a lot of goodwill out there. People are sound. And so if you're able to say, look, we want to make sure this works for everyone. We want to make sure we get this right. Be open. Say that it's safe to say no to me. It's okay if this doesn't work. You can say no for any reason. I use that language a lot as well. I also will admit that I'm still learning and I want to do it well. So please, if you notice me saying something, correct me, help me learn. There's a lot of goodwill out there, and I've had very positive experiences using this kind of an approach. So these actions themselves build trust, and that helps to build inclusion. Now, in addition to the workshop input, which we're so grateful for, we also got input from others, and thank you so much to them for sharing their time and perspectives. As we kind of wrap up this bit of the talk, I do want to say again, it's not perfection. It's not a destination. EDI is very much a journey. And so this is something that is a living document. We see this guide as evolving as we continue to learn more. So please reach out with your own thoughts or suggestions or stories maybe of how you're putting some of these practical ideas to use. We'd really love to hear how it's working in the real world. So please stay in touch, and thank you again so much for your time today. This has been a delight.